Hello, everyone. Uh, I think that most of you have already heard about Quarkus. And you've probably heard that it's a Kube-native, next generation Kube-native development stack for Java. And you have probably also heard that it's supersonic and subatomic. And this is pretty much true, right? So Quarkus was originally designed to perform exceptionally well in container environment. And our goal was to build applications that would start as fast as possible and consume as little memory as possible. Um, but soon after we started to reach those characteristics in prototypes, we realized that actually it opens up a lot of potential to improve the developer experience. And this is what I'm going to demonstrate today. Okay, so I will not have any slides because I don't really have much time, and I think it will be better to see things in action than to talk about them. So I will just develop a simple application and show you what it's like to develop with Quarkus. So if you don't have much experience with Quarkus, I think the easiest way to start a new application would be to go to the Quarkus website, quarkus.io, click on Start Coding, and then fill in this form, and by selecting features and technologies that you would like to enable in your application, for example, Hibernate, ORM, or Kafka, and so on. Right, so you get the idea. You select all the features that you would like. You fill in the details about the, for example, application name. You can select the build tool, Maven Cradle, Java version, and if you like to have a start code, so like a sample code, then you can generate your application, download the archive, unpack, and import it in your IDE. However, I will take a slightly different approach. I will use the Quarkus command line tools. So there is a Quarkus CLI that can do the same things but locally, so you don't really have to go and download the archive with your application. So here it is. I ask Quarkus to create an application. I give it a name, Cloud Builders UA, and then I select features that I want to enable. I will use a REST implementation, JDBC Postgres SQL, Hibernate ORM, Flyweight for schema migration, OpenAPI to test my endpoints. To generate Docker images, I include Docker, and Minikube as my Kubernetes cluster. So I just run this command and it will generate an application. And just for information, this command line tool that is called Quarkus, it actually is a Quarkus application itself. So you could actually use Quarkus to develop all sorts of tools, including the command line tools. So I'll cd in my project and I will import it in my IDE like this. And it's a very simple project. It has a single module. Here's its pom.xml. Just a brief overview. There's nothing really much to talk about it. We import the Quarkus POM to align the dependencies of extensions that I selected, so to make sure there are no conflicts. You can see all of them that I selected: Hibernate, Flyway, and so on. And there is a Maven plugin, Quarkus Maven plugin, that actually will launch the Quarkus build process and will build the application. This project also includes a starting code, so just a simple endpoint that returns a string. So once I have my application, my project generated, I can start Bootstrap a so-called development environment for it, and it's done with a simple command, Maven Quarkus dev. What happens now? Quarkus is launching my application, but in development mode, and by doing that, it also, you should see it soon. So here in the logs, if you pay attention, you may notice that Quarkus is actually starting a database for me. So I generated this application and I said that I will want to use PostgreSQL. But I didn't actually configure this database. My configuration file, here it is, it's empty, basically. It's empty, right? So Quarkus, however, decides that I will most probably use this database, so it bootstrapped it and it's available for my application to use. And this is what we call dev services. So by this feature allows us to bootstrap an environment for the application to run, right? So I don't really need to bootstrap external services to for development. Quarkus could do that for you automatically when you just launch your application in dev mode. And we support dev services for quite a few databases, things like messaging brokers, including Kafka, uh, single sign-on based on key cloak, and so on. Okay, so that's the idea. And then, yes, I have this endpoint. So I could go and check how it works. So to check how it works, I would need to open a browser and point it to the address and check the page, right? So another way of doing it, this terminal, this console is actually interactive. So there are a number of shortcuts. If I press H, I can see some of them listed here. So if I just press W, I will automatically get my page, the index page of my application opened in the browser for me. So I don't really have to type it. And it's an index page that was also generated by Quarkus tools. So you can see it. Well, it's too small to see it, but sorry, I probably cannot increase it here. But you get the idea. It's in under resources directory. It's right there. And you can see these extensions that I selected, links to Quarkus documentation, how to set up your IDE, visit dev UI, which we will a bit later. And here's my endpoint. So I'll click on hello, and I can see the string that is returned here. So in Quarkus, once my application is running in dev mode, actually I can apply changes. Let's make it more appropriate for this event. Let's change it to hello cloud builders Ukraine. Save it, and I refresh the browser, and I see the response. Right, so this is what Quarkus Dev Mode is about. Basically, I'll develop my application, and I don't really need to stop, go to command line, rebuild it, launch it, and then refresh the browser. I can do it right away in the browser, and Quarkus will pick up those changes. So my application will be a bit more sophisticated than this, so I will proceed with that. So I want to develop a simple to-do list management operation, so application. So I will have a to-do entity. It will be a JPA entity. So I annotate it with entity, and then I will extend so-called panache entity. So panache entity is a well, we could say it's a framework built on top of Hibernate that allows me to save on some boilerplate JPA code. So it allows me to focus on my model instead of really using the raw JPA API. So for example, if I visit Panache, I could actually write tests here before I have the implementation. So I start with an add, will be a post request and body map of title, edit, one, content type, I'm sending JSON, so that's it. And I will return the item that I created. So it should be edit. Okay. And if I do list, then after creation, I should have two items. Okay. The first one will be there. And I have the one that I just added. Edit. One. All right. So now this test is going to fail because I don't have this implemented in my resource. But I'll proceed anyway. Update, which will edit my existing item. So this will be, this will be patch request. I will target the item using a path element. So Todo ID, I pass the object, and then, yeah, I will return the updated entity. And in this case, I will have a single item because I just modified the initial entity. Okay, and the last one, delete. All right, test, delete. Yeah, this will be very simple. Delete, status code will be 204. This, and the size of the list will be 0. Size 0. All right, so I wrote my tests and I have 3 failures. So all I need to do now is go to my resource and implement them, which is pretty easy to do. So I'll start with add. It's a post request. It will return the item to add to do return to do and to do persist and flush. That should be it. Well, I saved my class and I see that now I have only 2 failures. So I'll proceed. Let's implement delete. Well, delete will return void. Delete. And now I need an ID. And ID is a path element. So in REST easy, in REST, in JAX-RS, this is how I would do this. Path would be declared as with this annotation. And I need to indicate that this argument is a REST path. So typically in JAX-RS, you would need to do something like this. But now you have ID in 3 places, 1, 2, 3. So Quarkus allows you to remove this boilerplate and just leave it at that. And now all I need to do is to do delete by ID. And that should be it. Saving. And I have, sorry about the bot. And I now have only 1 failure. So I have only 1 method to implement. And it will be patch. I'll keep the ID. I'll return to do. Call it edit. Do. All right. Now to do existing, I'll need to find the existing item. To do find by ID. And I'll return it as well, existing one. And I'll copy all the data, existing title, to do title, existing order, to do order, and the completed status. Sorry. Completed, to do completed. And of course I need to persist it as well. Persist and flush. And that's it. So I saved my changes and now I have all the tests passing. So, okay, basically the test and the backend logic is implemented, but I'm still missing the front end, which, to be honest, I will cheat and I will not do it right now, live coding. So I will simply copy it. So I will use something that was prepared before the presentation, and that should work. All right. right, so now if I go to Todo HTML, I should see my application. Okay, so this is the interface. And now I can say that I can create some to-do items. So let's try it. Stand with Ukraine. Okay, and I created my first to-do item. So it runs. And as you can see, I actually developed this application without running, adding anything in my configuration. My configuration is still empty. So now if I actually want to deploy this application to production, I will need the configuration, right? So I will need to configure where the database is, at least. So that's what I'm going to do next. And for that, I want to show you one feature that is also pretty useful. So in Quarkus, we have a notion of a dev UI. So I just press the D key in the terminal, and it automatically opened the dev UI, which is also referenced from the index page that was generated. Visit the dev UI. And this dev UI is basically a development dashboard that provides all sorts of features and options to explore. There are core Quarkus-specific ones, like, for example, Arc is our CDI implementation, so you could click on the bins and see all the bins in your application, where they are and so on. And then you can also click on dependency graph, so you can see the dependencies between your bins in your application. You can click on them and navigate from one to another and so on. So that could be interesting to look at and analyze. And there are all sorts of features here. So for example, I added all these kind of mini blocks. They represent an extension, Quarkus extension that I added to my project, right? So you may recognize here Flyway and Hibernate ORM, Kubernetes. So if I click on Kubernetes, I should see the manifests that are generated for my application here, okay? And so on, right? So every extension that you add to your application can add such a management feature, and you can use it from dev UI. For example, I added Docker, and I can see here build. So if I press on this button, I can build a container image just from in dev while running in dev mode from my dev UI. And here I can see a configuration editor. So if I press on the configuration editor, I will see all the configuration options that are available for my application. And this list is actually, it depends on the extensions that I added to my project. So if I add more extensions to my project, they will enable more config options for me. And this list is quite long. So if I can see what was used to run my application in dev mode, and it was filled in automatically by Quarkus. Entity, I can see that ID has been predefined. I can customize it, but there is a defaults. And if I go to a superclass, I can see there are all sorts of methods that will make my life easier dealing with these entities. So having done that, I can simply define my model for the to-do. So I will have a title for my to-do item. I will have an order, and I will have a flag indicating whether it's completed or not. Okay, that's about it. Now I will modify my endpoint. I will turn it into an API to manage my to-do items. So I will rename this to to-do resource. The first method that I will implement will be a list. I will return all the list, all the to-do items in a list. Call it a list, and it's very easy. I will call to-do list all, and then I will sort them by order. And that's it. So now I need to adjust the media type. So typically I would need to do something like this. However, in Quarkus, REST Easy Reactive is smart enough to figure it out, and I can omit it. By default, if it's not a string, it will use JSON serialization for the result. And also, actually, I would like to make it transactional because I'm accessing a database, and it's always a good idea to do that in a transactional context. And that's it. So now I can simply go and check how it works. So I should get an error. So I deliberately did it this way. And here's what happened. I got an error because order is a reserved word. Because Hibernate went ahead and generated a database table for me and used order as a column name, which you cannot do. So it failed. So now to fix it, I'm going to fix it and then I will show you what happens behind the scene. Do it this way, name, and I will use some name that is safe to use, ordering. So I'll save it. Now I'll go and refresh my browser. And I get the response, which is an empty string, of course, because I don't have any data. But here's what happened behind the scenes. So my application is running in dev mode. It's in error state, right? So I go and fix it. And then I press a refresh in the browser. So what happens is Quarkus intercepts the request. It goes and checks whether there are source code changes in my projects. It finds them, it goes and recompiles the classes, it bootstraps a new instance of my application. Hibernate goes to the database, generates the schema, and then the response is, then the request is served. Basically, there is an SQL request to go to the database to fetch the data and then return it to the client in the browser. And all that happened in like a blink of an eye, right? So this is what going after cloud native performance characteristics yields for um, developers. So developer productivity gets a boost as well, right? So now I'll proceed. I also have a test here generated for my project, and it's now out of date. As you can see, it expects hello REST Easy Reactive from hello endpoint, which does not exist anymore. So now, typically, to get the test results, I would need to launch a Maven or Gradle command to launch the test and get the results, right? In Quarkus, however, you could enable tests in dev mode, and Quarkus will give you instant feedback while you are coding what's the status of your test rate. So if you notice here, it says press R to resume testing. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm pressing R and it says starting tests. And now you could also notice that Quarkus is starting another database just for the tests. Right, so now I actually have two databases running. One is running for my application that I'm seeing in the browser, basically this dev mode that I'm testing manually. And one database, a dedicated database, is started to run the tests so that the changes that I make in my application while I'm testing it manually don't interfere with the database that is used for testing, right? Of course, I get a failure because this is really out of date, so I'll quickly fix it. So this API for testing is coming from Rest Assured, and it's a really great and powerful API to test endpoints. So I'll adjust it. I'll test my list API. Yeah, the status is okay. So what it returns here, it allows me to assert the JSON parts of the JSON that are sent as a response. So this get API will return a list, a JSON object, which is a list, right? So I could do some assertions on that list in this method. So the list is empty currently. So if I say the size is 0, that should pass. Right, I have all the tests passing now. It's not very useful though. I will I would like to add some test data. So this is what I'm going to do. So before each test, I'm going to make sure that there is some initial data in the database so I can test it. Okay. And the first thing I want to do is to make sure that the database is clean and there is no data that I don't expect. I'll create a single to-do item. It's new. Title was the test. Okay. And to-do persist and flush. So you can see that I'm using these convenience methods and they come from Hibernate Panache. Without Hibernate Panache, I would have to use the Entity Manager API and the JPA API in general. So it becomes very easy. So I'm creating a new entity, and I definitely want to do this in the transaction. So I annotate the method as transactional. So typically you would use transactional annotation on some application class. And I'm here in the test class, but Quarkus actually allows you to use these kind of annotations on test methods. So I created an entity. So I'll create a constant out of this because I'll need it. And I will save the ID of the item that I just created. ID to ID. That should be good enough. Okay, so now if I save it, of course, my test now fails because this size is not 0 anymore because I already have some test data. Actually, I will further improve this a little bit. So as you can see, I'm testing my to-do resource, and I have API here. And in to-do resource, I have API here. So what I prefer to do is add a little annotation that will allow me to remove this API from here. So it will be to do resource class. Once I do that, I can remove this API from here, and it will automatically take this path from the to-do resource. So I'll have it in one place, which is convenient because if I change it in this class, I will not have to adjust the test. So yeah, I'll fix the test now. Given that I already have some data and I return a list of objects, this rest assured library allows me to do assertions like this. I can take the first item in the list and make sure that its title is pass the tests, and it passes. So, okay, so that's the first test. So as you can see, I can write tests and get immediate feedback, which is cool. But also, I could really do test-driven development. So for example, if I want to evolve my application and add the possibility of creating new to-do items, updating them and deleting them, and if I click on these buttons, those config options could be copied to my configuration file. However, it's quite a long list, so I could do it differently. I could go to Hibernate ORM, press on the config editor, and I will see only the Hibernate specific configuration options. So now if I want to, I could copy these options to my config editor. I could type them in manually. However, there is a nice feature. I could click on dev services and say, copy to prod profile. So I'll do just that. So what happens now, the development environment, basically the dev tools, they take a snapshot of these properties and they copy them to my application properties. So if I now go to my application properties, I refresh them, and I see them copied here, so I could modify them. So in production, I don't want to drop and create a database, obviously. This URL will not work, so I'm going to deploy my application in Kubernetes cluster, so this database will not be available there. So I'll copy it. I'll copy the one that will work. Oh no, that's not the one. Yes, this one will work. Okay, so that's one thing. Now I will also want to create a database schema when I deploy my application in production. So I'll go to Flyway, I click on data sources, and what it allows me to do is create initial migration file. So if I click on that, it allows me to create a migration file based on the schema that Hibernate ORM generated while running the application in dev mode. So that's what I just did. So now if I open, yes, if I open my configuration file, I can see some Flyway options. So migrate at start true. And if I refresh my resources, I will see DB migration. You cannot see it well, but there is an SQL file which you should be able to see better. I think it's a little bit better. So this is what Flyway generated for me. So I could deploy my application, and the Flyway will create the schema. All right, that's it basically. Now I can stop my application and deploy it to my Kubernetes cluster. And to do that, all I need to do is I slightly lost my no terminal. Oh, here it is. So and here's the command. So now that I'm ready to deploy, all I need to do is say maven mvn clean package. I'll skip the test and I add this option Quarkus Kubernetes deploy, and that's it. So I'll launch this command. Now Quarkus is going to generate a container image and deploy it. So it's selecting Minikube, this is my local environment, and it's done. So now if I go to my Kubernetes dashboard, services, I see the new service, deployments, and pods. Okay, so now I should be able to see my application running in Kubernetes. Cloud Builders UI. No. Group service. Cloud Builders UI. Okay, so this application is served from Kubernetes. Okay, and if I go to todo.html, I can see, oh, sorry, that's stale data. This is running in Kubernetes now. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is how easy I can deploy my application just by adding an option, Quarkus Kubernetes deploy. So I'll add this item here. And also, you may have heard that Quarkus provides an easy way to generate native images, and that's true. So all I need to do to generate a native image, I could take this command. If I want to deploy my application in built-in native to Kubernetes cluster, all I need to do is take this command that I previously used to deploy it to Kubernetes, add Kube-native, which enables the native profile in Quarkus project. And well, that alone will build a native executable, but it will use my local environment to build a native executable. So the native executable will be specific to the computer that I built it on. However, if I'm deploying it to a remote Kubernetes cluster, I will add one more option, Quarkus native remote container build. So what this does, it will build a native executable in a container using the remote Docker daemon. Okay, I will not launch it right now because it will take quite a lot of time and I don't have it. So what I did previously, I actually pre-built it and pre-deployed it. So I have it, if I go to services, I also have Cloud Builder's UA native, which is exactly the same application which was built with this command I just showed. I just deployed it previously. So I can just launch it. Builder's UA native. Okay, and here it is. Here it is. So now, actually, well, you cannot see the address, it's too small, but now I have two applications, two identical applications, one running in JVM mode, one running in native, and they pull data from the same database. Right, so I can say that I finished the demo and then answer questions. As you can see, both applications pull the same data. That's what I wanted you to demonstrate. That's it from me. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Alexey, for such insightful talk. And we have really question interesting. Do you have any tips on how to migrate the existing Spring Boot project to Quarkus and how to prepare projects for such migration?
That's a very good question. It really depends. So um, typically in Quarkus, uh, we are pretty close in many things, in many APIs, and we even have in Quarkus we have even extensions that are called Spring compatibility layer, which means that you can add those extensions to your project and literally use Spring API to develop a Quarkus application. So that could be a path. It doesn't mean that we will cover the complete original Spring application, but you could do a lot of that. So let me quickly check how many we have, just so to give you an idea. So we have Spring Boot properties, Spring Cache API, Spring Cloud Config, Data JPA, Spring DI, of course, schedules, Spring Security, Spring Web API, and so on. Right. So that will definitely help you. Otherwise, um, yeah, you just have to try and see how it works by probably incorporating some of these extensions into your project, and then at some point you will most probably need to learn the API that Quarkus uses and migrate to those. You should definitely also join the Quarkus community channels on Zulip or GitHub discussions. We are pretty responsive, and actually our community is pretty responsive. So I'm pretty sure you will get help, because we see that a lot of people, a lot of users are migrating, are interested in Quarkus, and they are coming from Spring. So you're not alone. There is quite a lot of experience in migration, so people will be happy to share their stories and help you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexey, for your speech, for joining us today, for supporting Ukraine, and see you on the next speeches, on the next Java conferences.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Goodbye.